So in this video, I'm going to show you how to perform simple form validation using jQuery. And this technique is really simple to use. You don't need any plugins or any fancy code. And it's really fast, and it's really useful if you're working with a framework that maybe doesn't have the best form validation. So the first thing that you'll want to do is go and get the CDN for jQuery or download it. If you're just doing development, you can just grab the CDN uncompressed and then just copy the script. And then all you need to do is paste it in your HTML. And you always want to make sure that you paste it at the body. That way the bulk of your application loads before it gets to the JavaScript files, which are probably the biggest files in your application. And then you also want to make sure it's loaded before all the JavaScript that maybe depends on jQuery. Okay, and then you want to go ahead and test that to make sure. So what I'll do is I'm going to just hide everything. So what I'll do is say body hide. So if you're correctly mapped with jQuery, then everything on the page should disappear, and you'll see it right there. And actually I'm going to open up my developer tools really quick and just have this here at the bottom. So we know jQuery is up and running. So I just want to show you my HTML really quick. I have a little form here with couple of inputs, really simple form here with a button. And the important thing that I want to highlight here is that I have an ID of username and ID of email for both inputs. And then the button has an ID called a submit button. And so going back over to the JavaScript, actually go back over here. What I'll do is underneath the inputs, I'm going to start a new paragraph that says this field is required. And what I'll do is I'll add a class of, I'll say validation error, or actually I'll name it username error. Then I'll copy that same one and paste it underneath the email input, except I'll name it email error. And so this is what it looks like so far. We got the two fields there. And so what I'll do is in my CSS file, I'm going to take both of those, which is username, let me double check what that was called, username error and email error. So I'll say username error, email error, and I'm going to pass in a custom color, which is this one. It's like a light red, and I'm also going to pass in some padding of 12 pixels. So alright, and so this is what it looks like. Just looks a little bit better. Now I want to customize this so that anytime I type in, this is going to adjust. So we want to go back into our JavaScript file and start building on the jQuery. So what I'll do first is I'm going to grab the username ID. So that was username, and you'll see that right here in the input. I have the ID of username. So I'm going to grab that ID and I'm going to run this function on input, not click, input. So every time something is input into that form, I'll run this function. So for what I'll do for right now is I'll just say test. So let's see that, and you'll see now every time I type into the console, it's logging a test down here at the bottom. Not the console, the input. Okay. And so what I can do is grab that value, and the way you do that is, so I'll create a new variable and I'll name it username, and then what I'll say is this input.val. Whoops. So that grabs the value of this input and assigns it here. And so I'll just put it in an alert box right now. So I'll just show you how this works. right? And so every single time I type in something into that input, it logs it here into the alert box. All right. So basically every time something is typed, we can check it and perform any conditions that we want. So one of the ones that I will do is I'll say if username.length is less than 1, then I'm going to say field is required. All right. And then if it is more than 1, then I'll say field is valid. Okay, so then I'll just test that. Right, and as soon as I enter something as a field, it becomes valid. And then once I delete it, it'll say field is required. So now we need to pass that in the form of a message. So what I'll do is, instead of field is required, what I'll do first over here in the CSS is I'm going to hide this. I'll say display none, and then you'll see it goes away. And then here in the script, what I'll do is if it's less than 1, then I'll bring it back out, right? So I'll just say username error dot show. And then down here, I'll basically do the opposite, which is hide. Right, then I'll just test this. And you'll see there, anytime it's empty, we get that error. So now I want to do further validation, right? Right now we have basically an infinite amount of characters that user can enter. So I want to limit that. In addition, you can type in special characters and there's no error. So we want to provide an error for that. So down here, once the requirement validation is passed, I'll run a check. So I'm going to create a regular expression, and I'll name it test exp. All right, and so I'll just show you really quick how this works. If you just search reg express tester, you can click on this one right here. And so I'll show you how this works, right? So this is what the normal username looks like, right? Let's start off with maybe just a letter. So you want to type in brackets here, plus sign, then the $sign. So within these brackets, you can put all the criteria you want. For example, let's say A through Z. Now, if I said F, it wouldn't work. Or if I said G, then you'll see there it works. So I'm going to do all characters A through Z. Now, you'll notice if I type in uppercase, it doesn't work anymore, even though it's between A through Z. So what we have to do is type it in caps, A through Z, like that. Let's say I want to have a number in my username. Now suddenly it doesn't work. So what you can do is just add in 0 through 9, and that'll allow all the different numbers here, right? And then lastly, special characters won't work, spaces won't work, and that's what you want. You just want an alpha numeric regular expression. So I'm going to take that and cut it out and paste it here. And so you want to put it inside of forward slashes, just like that. And so what you can do now is test the username against this expression. And so the way you do that is with the name of the regular expression dot test, and then you pass in whatever variable that you want to test, or whatever string. So I'll pass in the username. And since this isn't going to show anything, what I'll do is I'll log the result. So I'll say alert, and then I'll paste it in here. All right, so every time that I enter a letter now, it's going to run that test. So I typed in the letter F and it returns true. Type in another letter, true. Number, true. Now watch what happens when I enter a special symbol, we get false. Okay, and so that's how we validate the characters in this input. And so I'm just grab this and cut it out. And here what I'll say, if the test doesn't return true, put the exclamation mark there, then I'll do the same thing that I did above here, show the error, else I'll hide it, right? So let's just see that, and you'll see now, as soon as I type in a special character, you'll get that error there. Now the problem is we're still getting that same error rather than saying something like, hey, no special characters. The reason for that is because I hard-coded the error message here. So what we need to do is remove this and not have it hard-coded. That way we can manipulate this with jQuery. So I'm going to get rid of those, and instead what I'll do here is where it says show, bring this down for a sec, and I'll say .text and then add the text here, and then add that .show. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing down here for this one. I'll say .text, and I'll put must not have any special characters. Right, and I'm gonna go ahead and test this out. And you'll see there now we can manipulate that error message. Okay. The last thing that I want to do is check the length of this. So underneath this one, I'll do my final check. And I'll say it must be at least 3 characters, but no more than, I'll say 10 characters. So if it is, if it's less than 3 or more than 10, then I'll give the error message, which is this one. And so what you'll start to notice right about now is that repeating these can get kind of messy, and so there's an easier way to do this. So what we can do is just create a function, and I'll name it message. And in this message, what I'll do is I'll pass in the body or the text that I want to display. And then I'll have another function for hiding the message, right? So in this hide, what I'll do is, whoops, misspelled this. So that should be TION. So right here where I have this hide, instead of using that, what I'm going to do is use hide like that, and then paste it in here. Right, so that just kind of cleans up the code a little bit, which makes it easier to read. So then here, what I'll do is I'll copy this one for right now. Instead of having this text in there like that, what I'll do is I'll just pass in whatever is passed in as the parameters of the function. So then instead of this, what you can just do is MSG, the parentheses, and then the string, just like that. Okay, and so then I'll just do the same for this one. And then lastly, this one. So not absolutely necessary to do this, but just cleans up your code a little bit, so you don't have to repeat things as much. And then I'm just going to test this to make sure nothing broke. All right, there you go, and you'll see everything still works as planned. And I also want to check, make sure the length is, actually I didn't finish updating that. So for this one, I'll say must be at least 3 characters, but no more than 10. Else, I'll go ahead and hide. Then I just want to test this last one. And all right, there we go. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I don't want the submit button to always be available. I only want it to be available if the form is valid. So what I'll do is by default, I'm going to disable it. So I'm going to go into the button and type in disabled. All right, and you'll see that here. It's disabled now. We can't submit. And what I'll do with jQuery is once the validation passes, then I'll enable that. So remember the ID is the submit button. So I'm going to create a function outside of this, and I'll name it, not a function, but it's going to be an object, and I'll name it form valid, and I'll pass in username and set it to false by default. All right, and I'm going to create another function that says check validation. And so what this is going to do is going to on each input, it's going to check validation, and if it passes validation, we'll enable that button. So we'll say if formValid.username is true, then I'll take that button, which is submit button, Let me just double check on that. Submit button. And I'll do remove attribute disabled. Else I will add the attribute of disabled. So attr disabled and then set true. So I'm going to perform this check after every validation, right? So here I'm also going to perform it underneath hide, underneath message, whoops, and then underneath hide, message, and then hide. So another thing that I want to do is underneath this check validation and right before it, actually, what I'll do is set this to true if it is valid and false if it's not. So right here we know that it's not valid here, so we'll set it to false. We'll say form valid username equals false. And then right here under hide, we know if we got here it's true. And then we'll do the same down here. We know if we're here it's false, if we're here it's true. And then lastly, if we're here it's false, and then if we're here it's true. Alright, so let's go ahead and check that really quick. And you'll see now, as soon as you enter valid data, you can submit the form. And then if I enter special characters, it will disable it again, right? So you don't want the users to be able to submit unless all inputs are valid. So then I'm just going to do all that exact thing, but for the email input. So I'll just open a new file here and replace all the usernames with email. Right. And so if you just search JavaScript email regular expression, they have a good one right here, W3. So I'm just going to use the same one. And so I'll just replace the one here and paste it there. Oops. And instead of this message, I'll just say must be a valid email. For email, I'll do 30 characters instead. And so here's another thing that I want to add. Inside the function I created up here, I'm going to pass in email, set that to false. And so then here for the check validation, I'll say must check the email field as well, right? So it's checking both of those now. So if both of them aren't valid, then we're not going to remove that disabled. So both of them have to be valid. And so hit save on that, and then you want to go ahead and check that, type in a username, and you'll see that it's not disabled, or it's not enabled until you type in a valid email address. And then if I type in, say, a special character, it disables it again. It doesn't allow the user to submit. So now one last thing that I want to do is I'm going to grab an HTML form tester. And so what I'll do is just grab this script here, and I'm going to place it inside of my form. So I'll say action, and then I'm also going to add an ID to this, and I'll say I'll just call it registration form, so reg form for short. So at the very top here, I want to show you a problem that we get. So I'm going to say reg form on submit. So whenever this form is submitted, I'll run a function. And so what I'll do is I'll create an alert that says form submitted. So now I want to show you what the problem that we're getting now. I'm going to fill out a valid form here. And watch what happens when I spam submit. You'll see that the alert window continuously pops up, right? That's because the form is being submitted many times. And we don't want that. We only want the user to be able to submit one time. So what you can do is pass into the function the letter E, which allows you to control events. So for example, what I'll do is I'll say E prevent default. Okay. And so what that does is it prevents the default action. In this case, it's going to be submit, right? So this isn't going to even allow us to submit the form. And so watch what happens. And you'll notice before it was taking us to that action that we added, right? But now when I hit submit, nothing happens. It's not redirecting. Okay. That's because I prevented the default action. And so what I'll do is I'm going to add a class to this, right? To that form. So if you go back to the form, you'll see there's no class currently on the form. It's just an ID of reg form. So what I'll do is I'll say if this form has class of form submitted, then I'll prevent the default action, right? Then I'll do that. If it doesn't, then I want to go ahead and add that class. So I'll say this add class form submitted. And so basically how this works is whenever I hit submit on this form, it's gonna run through this check, and if it's the first time it's ever being submitted, then this won't happen. Instead, this will happen. And what this does is it adds that class to the form, and then it's going to submit the alert box. And then if I hit submit again, it's going to run this top condition, which is prevent the default, right? So it's going to recognize that it has this class already, and then it's going to prevent the form from being submitted multiple times. So I'm going to go ahead and try the spam again and see what happens. And you'll see no matter how many times I press enter, it only submits that one time. All right. So one last thing that I want to do is whenever you hit submit on this form, what I like to do is disable the inputs and disable the button so that users can't do anything with this form while it's loading. Not that it necessarily matters, but that's just something that I like to do. So what you can do is down here, and I'll actually get rid of this. I'm going to disable all of the inputs, right? So our first one is username. And so I'll add the attribute of read only and set it to true. And then I'll do the same thing with email. Then lastly, I'll grab the submit button, and that one I will just disable. All right, so when I hit submit, it'll add this class, it'll disable all the inputs, including the button, and that will prevent the user from spamming, right? So this is what it looks like. Now it's going to happen really fast because it's going to redirect, but if you pay attention to the fields and the button, you'll see once you hit, they lock right away.